All right. All right. Got recording started. All right, welcome to class today, you guys. So last week we finished up the endocrine system and we covered the male reproductive system. So now that we've completed the endocrine system, make sure you go on to Moodle and take the endocrine system quiz. The male and female reproductive system quiz will come up after we're done with this. Did you guys have any questions about anything that we covered last week before we jump into a new topic? All right, you guys are easy.
Actually, I have a question. Was the test due today, or is it due next week?
Ooh, good question. Let me double check before I give you wrong info. Let's see. This is week 8, endocrine quiz. Okay, when I'm looking at Moodle, there's a text. It says it's due December 3rd. That obviously is not the case. This will close
because it said June 3rd was when it was closing, so I was
Thursday,
confused.
June 3rd. So yeah, go ahead and get those into me since we're done with the endocrine system. Let me see. Give me 1 second. I'm going to change the due date on that because June 3rd is way too long. All right, so it opened May 13th. So the endocrine system has been open for a few days. Today is Thursday. So we'll say this Saturday, the 29th by midnight.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep. May 29th, and it will close at 11:59 on Saturday. So the moment it is Sunday, it is too late. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Endocrine quiz is due by this Saturday at midnight. Sunday is officially too late. Next week, week 9, we will be covering digestion and metabolism, the reproductive system quiz. Quiz 5, let's see, opens Thursday, June 3rd. Nope, I'm going to change that. All right, reproductive system will open today after class because we will be done covering the reproductive system after class today. So May 27. This is very exciting. I know it's very tedious changing these things.
And that one will be due before class next Thursday?
Next Thursday, yep. So that will be June 3rd. And class starts at 1:30. All right. So endocrine quiz due by the end of this week. Reproductive quiz due by the start of class next week. Super. All right. Slides for next week, digestion, metabolism. Super. And then the following week, week 10, your final will be online, and there's an extra credit assignment that you guys are able to get. So it's a specific researcher-specific diet, like the Mediterranean or the keto or the paleo diet. Give me the rundown of it. What are the benefits, pros, cons? What kind of who would benefit the most from this kind of diet? Are any people contraindicated from this kind of diet? Things of that nature. And Moodle says due June, excuse me, it says due June 17th. That will be due the week you take your final. So if you submit an extra credit assignment to me when you submit your final, and I'll get those in. And what I'm going to do for that extra credit is I'm actually going to take 10 points, and I'm going to just look at your grade sheet, and I'm going to sprinkle in those 10 points where you need them the most. So whether that's a quiz or a test or whatever, if there's a quiz that you're still missing that you haven't gotten to me with about to get it made up, those 10 points can go there. Or, if you've got everything done, then I can just pepper them in where they'll be most useful to you.
I
Good
like
stuff.
that a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we've got our next quiz due dates sorted out. We've got the extra credit assignment sorted out. We've got the idea of how today is going to go, reproductive system, female reproductive. Next week, digestion and metabolism. That will be, I don't believe there is, let me triple check. There is no quiz on the digestive system. So once you've taken the reproductive quiz, that's the last quiz. Then it's just the extra credit if you want to do it and the final. And that will be it. Let me double check the final dates too, just to make sure that that opens up the way it's supposed to. That will be the 10th, yes. And the 17th at 1, yes. So that will open up Thursday. I'll change that to Thursday morning.
Will anything from the midterm be on the final?
It very well may. So I would review everything, nervous system, and all the other systems that we've covered. All right. So the final will open at 8 o'clock in the morning, the day of class, week 10. That'll be a Thursday. And it will remain open for a week. So the following Thursday, which would be week 11 at 1 o'clock, it closes. So you have a full week to get that final submitted. Good stuff?
You said it opens on the 10th?
Correct. It will open on the 10th at 8 a.m. and it will close June 17th at 1 p.m. There is a 2-hour time limit. There are 20 questions. And I'm looking over the questions just to see questions about hormones, questions about sympathetic nervous system, questions about digestion, hormones, metabolism. So yes, 20 questions. I would review everything that we've covered: nervous system, endocrine, reproductive, and the final will include digestion. Good stuff?
Good stuff.
Good stuff. All right.
There's a question from in the chat.
Yes, please. Oh, from the chat.
It's
Sorry.
not me. I'm just pointing it out to you.
Thank you. Moodle shows a homework on week 9 that says it requires some thought and research. Let me double check. Moodle says week 9. Question will take some thought and time to answer. So you'll write about, tell me what a healthy diet means to you. Everyone should eat the same amount, or should everyone eat the same amount and types of foods? Explain, does food correlate to how we feel emotionally? If so, what might that be? In what ways might you be able to support your clients with this information? This is listed as, I believe, a homework assignment. So along with the questions that we've been submitting every week. Yeah, but it's about quality, not word count. So is there a question, or are we just pointing this out? I just want to make sure that I answer any questions that we have.
No, I was just pointing it out because we were talking about assignments.
Thank you, Galena. I appreciate that. Is there a study guide for the final? There is a review for the final exam. Let me see when it becomes available. I'll make it available now. It's available on week 10 now. It says review for final exam. It's there. Thanks, Becca. All right, everybody ready to get started? Are you ready for this?
Yep.
Awesome. All right, so we are going to begin with the female reproductive system. And we start with the gross anatomy. So the female gonads are ovaries. These are analogous to the male testes. They're held together by, are held in place by connective tissue. So they are attached to the outer wall of the uterus, and they come in very close contact with the fallopian tubes or the oviducts. The main portion of the uterus, the body of the uterus, is the organ that will contain and hold the developing baby. We also have the cervix, the vagina, and the outer portion of the genitals, which is the vulva. So the ovaries are the female gonads. These are the guys that are producing the eggs, holding the immature eggs. They ripen and become fertile within the ovum before they are then released into the oviduct. They're located posterior to the, are located near the lateral walls of the pelvic cavity. So the ova is produced in the ovaries, and the ovaries, when a female is born, they are holding all of the eggs that they will ever have in their life. They just become mature kind of one at a time, once a month, once puberty begins. The primary oocytes, or the immature eggs, are stored in what is called the primordial follicle, which is a very fancy name for it. These are the little baby eggs that are not quite ready to start their lives just yet. They're all kind of unripe. As ovulation occurs, the egg is released into an oviduct or a fallopian tube. So the fallopian is more likely than not named after the doctor who discovered it. And then the proper name, oviduct, the prefix ovi refers to an egg, and duct is just a fancy word that we use to mean tube. So oviduct is our fancy medical word for egg tubes. The oviducts carry the mature ovum towards the uterus. More often than not, fertilization of the egg actually occurs in the fallopian tube, and then the fertilized egg travels its way into the body of the uterus. So one end of the fallopian tube is open and is in very close contact with the ovary, so that when the ovary releases the egg, it can basically be taken right into the tube. The other end is attached to the inside of the uterus, and it is lined with ciliated epithelium. So these are epithelial tissues that has cilia. These are these hair-like structures that wave together, and this is to create a kind of current in the fluid, which keeps the egg moving in the right direction. And again, this is the most common site of egg fertilization. The uterus's location is anterior to the rectum, behind and above the bladder. So you can imagine, as the baby is developing and getting larger and larger, that uterus is pushing down on the female's bladder, which is why pregnant women have to pee like all the freaking time, because they're constantly getting their bladder squeezed. Poor things. The three main parts of the uterus are the body, the cervix on the inferior side, and the fundus, which is like the roof of the house. The middle layer is known as the myometrium, myo meaning muscle. This is the smooth muscle layer that is doing the contracting when we go into contractions. It is a thick, smooth muscle wall portion within the body of the uterus. The inner lining is the endometrium, prefix endo means within, and it is an inner mucous membrane. So it just keeps the inner lining nice and lubricated. Mucus helps prevent bacterial infections and fungal infections and all that kinds of stuff. And the uterus is held in place by ligaments. There are suspensory ligaments that keep the organ in its position within the abdomen. And it functions to provide a protected, nourishing environment for the growing fetus. It receives its sensory nerve supply from nerve roots at T11 and T12. And like most organs, it gets sympathetic and parasympathetic motor divisions. So the connections to the nervous system will allow it to activate during fight or flight, or return to the default mode, rest or digest. Components of the female reproductive system, we have the vagina, which is the muscular elastic tube that extends from the cervix of the uterus to the exterior of the body. And this portion is lined with stratified squamous epithelial. Stratified tells you it's forming in layers. Squamous means flat. So these are layers of flat, like pancake-like cells. Just like your skin, they will grow up from the bottom, decaying as they rise from the top. There are acidic secretions within the vagina to prevent bacterial growth. The vagina is also known as the birth canal and is the site of sexual intercourse. And here we see a sagittal section. And I know this is really super nice illustration. I'm going to pull up the anatomy app here in just a minute. With the external genitalia, we have the mons pubis. The translation is pubic mound. This is a pad of fatty tissue that sits anterior to the pubic bone. On top of that pad of fat is where the pubic hair sits. The labia minora and majora, the inner and outer lips of the vagina, can close or open in response to stimulation. The clitoris is composed of erectile tissue, very much analogous to the male penis. It uses the same kind of vascular tissue that swells with blood. And as we talked about last week with the development of the male reproductive system, remember the proto-reproductive system starts out as female, and when the male hormones are activated, it's the clitoris that grows in response and becomes the male penis. The glands outside of the vaginal opening release mucous membranes to maintain moisture. These are known as Bartholin's glands. The mammary tissue of the breasts is constructed out of modified sweat glands. So these sweat glands begin to swell. They begin to become grouped into what are known as lobules, and they produce milk when in response to prolactin, and they release milk in response to oxytocin. So there's one hormone for you to create milk. There is a separate hormone for you to release the milk. And the size of breasts in men and women is determined by fat deposits. Now, there are several hormonal cycles at play. The first we'll talk about is the ovarian cycle. Again, ova means egg. So the ovarian cycle is the cycle of the egg. We are not looking at hormones or anything else. We are just looking at what's going on with the egg. And we have three phases. They are the follicular, the ovulation, and the luteal phase. A nice, neat way to summarize this is we have the preparation, the release, and the recovery. So the follicular phase is the phase of follicular growth. The follicles are developing. This is the first half of the cycle, days 1 to 14. One dominant follicle, and it will shuffle month to month, either the left or the right ovary will begin to grow in response to the follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone that is secreted from the pituitary gland. As the follicle receives these hormones, one follicle per ovary per month will begin to secrete estrogen. On day 14, we have the release. An ovum is released from the ovary. It makes its way into the fallopian tube. After that moment, we begin the luteal phase. So the ovulation phase is a single event. We release an egg. That is the dividing line between the preparation phase and the recovery phase. The luteal phase begins on day 14 and lasts until day 28. The follicle becomes a corpus luteum, a white body, and it begins to secrete progesterone in response to the presence of the luteinizing hormone from the pituitary gland. If there is no pregnancy that occurs, the corpus luteum will begin to degenerate, and this entire cycle will begin again. Now, if pregnancy occurs, then a whole new cycle takes place, and we will talk about that cycle in a few minutes. Oops. Oh, my notes is doing weird stuff, man. Ovarian cycle, day 1 through 14, day 14, day 14 through 28. For the menstrual cycle, this is, you know, the way I kind of like to frame talking about the menstrual cycle is, you know, renting a venue and getting banners and putting up streamers and balloons, and you've got tablecloths down and centerpieces made, and you've got all the decorations set for this grand party, and nobody shows up. And in a fit of rage, you rip all the banners down and you tear down the streamers and you throw all the decorations in the garbage, and then you start planning a new party. So the beginning portion of this phase, days 1 through 5, the endometrial lining is shed. The uterus has prepared for a party. The walls have thickened. We've become engorged with blood vessels. We're really laying on the nutrients. If there's a baby coming, man, we want this party to be lit, fam. But the baby didn't come. No one shows up to the party. So we rip down all the streamers and we have to shed all of that extra tissue that we've grown in preparation for pregnancy. This takes about a week. Around day 5, we will begin the proliferative phase. So now we are anticipating the next party. We are anticipating the next pregnancy. So we begin getting new streamers and blowing up new balloons. The endometrial lining thickens in preparation for pregnancy. So the lining begins to thicken. It begins to become engorged with blood vessels. It becomes awash with nutrients and oxygen. Then we enter the secretory phase, the phase of secretion. This phase corresponds to the luteal phase of the ovarian cycle. This is the recovery phase. It is influenced by the presence of progesterone. The endometrium continues to build. The uterine glands produce nutrient-rich secretions. This lasts until day 28. So at the last minute, when you realize no one is coming to the party, this phase is over, and we begin day 1 of the menstrual phase, and we start tearing down all the decorations again. So every month, the uterus is going through this cycle of preparing for a pregnancy does not occur, so we tear down the old tissue, only to then begin growing a new set of tissue, preparing for the next pregnancy. It is a Sisyphean affair, you guys. Sisyphus, the guy that had to push the rock up the hill. So we have the menstrual cycle. We also have the hormonal cycle. So the hormonal cycle, which is regulating the menstrual cycle and the ovarian cycle, begins in the hypothalamus. We will recall that the hypothalamus released GnRH in response to hormonal and neural signals. So when the hypothalamus releases GnRH, the GnRH is carried to the pituitary gland. Specifically, I believe it was the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary will in turn begin to release luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. When these hormones are released into the bloodstream, they will be carried to every cell in the body, but every cell does not have the receptors for these hormones. So most cells are completely nonplussed by the presence of the hormone. However, the cells in the ovaries do have the target receptors, so they are the only ones that become affected by these hormones. The ovaries will begin the process of follicle development. The follicle will then secrete estrogen. Estrogen increases follicle development. So this positive feedback loop will continue until an ovum becomes fertile or ripened, and then it will burst from the follicle and begin the menstrual cycle. Good stuff so far?
Good stuff.
Good
Is
stuff.
that bursting part where you feel really crampy?
No, the cramping comes from the smooth muscle of the uterus as it contracts to try to pull the inner lining off. It's the cramping that you're feeling is when we're ripping down the decorations. The bursting of the follicle, you're talking about a single cell, so you don't really feel it. It's very, very small. Yeah, it's the shedding of the inner uterine lining is the cramping that you feel, because the smooth muscle has to contract to make that happen, and it's very uncomfortable. I hear. All right, a bit about ovaries. So ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone. We mentioned that when we talked about the endocrine system. Estrogen and progesterone will inhibit luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. So they create a negative feedback loop with the hypothalamus, right? The hypothalamus begins menstruation. As menstruation begins, they release hormones that tone down menstruation just for that cycle to begin again. When the egg is not fertilized and the luteinizing hormone is inhibited, the corpus luteum will begin to degenerate. So the corpus luteum is the empty follicle that's left after the egg bursts out. So you've got all these follicles that have little baby eggs, right? These little unripe eggs. When the hypothalamus signals every month, one of your ovaries will pick one of its follicles to become ripe. And that egg will mature, it will release estrogen. And when it bursts out, it leaves this empty hole, this little husk where the cell used to live. That becomes the corpus luteum. It will kind of close up and shrivel away. Corpus luteum is a white body. The corpus luteum also begins a new life as an endocrine gland. It begins secreting hormones like progesterone and estrogens. It also will release the hormone relaxin, which relaxes the soft tissue specific, so it loosens up your joints, as well as a hormone called inhibin, which inhibits the secretion of follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. You got to wonder where they come up with these names, right? Relaxin, inhibin. But once the corpus luteum has produced the hormones that it's going to produce and it reaches the end of its life and it dies, it will wither into a small white bit of scar tissue. So we can examine the ovaries post-mortem, and we can look and we can see all the periods that she had, all the little scars of the eggs that had ripened and then the glands withered away. And what's left is known as the corpus albicans. You may recognize that word albicans, the root alba. The best example is the linea alba. It's that white string from your ribs to your pubis. It's the midline where your abdominal muscle is attached to. You guys recall what I'm talking about? The linea alba, Latin literally translated the white line. All right, so
Any
here,
relation to Jessica?
no, but she's, if I'm not much mistaken, I believe Jessica Alba is Latina, and her last name is a Latin word for white. No kin to Betty White, I'm sure. All right, so our next slide just kind of combines the three cycles that we mentioned into kind of one overall process. We'll start back up at the top. So we begin with the hypothalamus releasing GnRH, which goes to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland will then release follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. The ovaries will begin to produce and secrete estrogens, which will not only maintain secondary sexual characteristics, but they also thicken the uterine lining. So we are building up the decorations, getting ready for the party. Estrogen begins to increase follicle development. The follicle the egg bursts out, the follicle becomes a corpus luteum. The corpus luteum will secrete estrogens and progesterone. As well as relaxin and inhibin. So relaxin relaxes the soft tissues. When a woman is preparing for childbirth, the pubic bones at the pubic symphysis will become detached from each other. So your two hips become unhinged at the front. That is to allow the hips to expand to accommodate the exiting baby. But because it's a hormone and it's carried in the blood and it's affecting soft tissue, we can't just target that one bit. It affects all the soft tissue. So all the joints become relaxed, right? So shoulders and fingers and elbows, all your joints become a little bit looser. Once childbirth is over with and we stop producing the hormone relaxin, then all of the joints will tighten back up. But this is a process that takes days to weeks after childbirth. And inhibin inhibits your follicle stimulating hormone so that we stop the period, right? This is, or the menstrual cycle. This is a way that the system feeds back on itself so that we inhibit the initial causes. So we bring the period to an end, and then that decline triggers an increase in the next hormones, which cause the period to begin. So once the corpus luteum has done its job, it will then decay to become the corpus, what was it? The corpus albicans. And the corpus albicans is dead. It's a little bit of scar tissue. That's the corpse. Corpus albicans. Okay, so no fertilization occurs. The corpus luteum decomposes into the corpus albicans. This will cause a decrease in FSH and LH hormones. This will cause the uterine lining to begin to constrict. The lining will slough off. That is the menstrual cycle, right? We're discharging all of that stuff. The decreased estrogens and progesterone will trigger an increase in GnRH. So the cycle begins again. The act of sloughing off triggers the production of the hormone that set the whole chain in motion. And thus repeats the drama, folks. Rinse and repeat from the first menstrual cycle, which does have a distinct name if you are not aware. A female's first period of her life is known as menarche. Menarche, the first menstrual cycle. This will continue for the rest of her adult life on a 28-day cycle until fertilization happens. So fertilization is the union of two gametes. The gametes are sperms and eggs. Sperms and eggs are gametes. When two gametes unite, they create one full fertilized egg, which is called a zygote. This zygote now has 46 chromosomes, which is the number that we all have. It received 23 chromosomes from the sperm and 23 chromosomes from the egg. So each of these gametes has half of the material that we need to create a full person. When the sperm and the egg come together, we now have a full volume of the instructions. Luke, I did not know that. Are you kidding me? Luke just added in the chat, a person's first ejaculation is called their spermarchy in the same style as menarche. I've never heard that word before. I've never known that. I'm gonna file that away.
Sons of Anarchy.
Spermarchy. I know. Well, it begins the adolescent years, and we know how lawless and rebellious they can be. Oh, thank you for that addition, Luke.
I got
right.
you.
All right, so Brief reminder, you guys, pregnancy and fetal development is really outside our scope. We need to have a basic overview. So once the egg is fertilized, remember, fertilization most often occurs in the fallopian tube. So once we now have an official zygote, now the zygote has to travel down the fallopian tube using those little ciliated cells, right? Keeping that current flowing, keep the egg moving in the right direction. Once it is in the uterus, it will implant somewhere in the uterine wall. Remember, we've prepped for this, right? We've been ready for this party since the first period. Every month we grow, we pull up all these decorations, streamers, balloons, tablecloths, the works, centerpieces. We've engorged the inner lining of the uterus with blood vessels. We've made it rich with oxygen and nutrients. We're just waiting for this egg to implant. And finally it does. And once it does, we begin the most dangerous part of pregnancy, the first trimester. This is where all of the parts are very, very small, which means if something is going to go wrong, it's very easy for it to go wrong right now. A lot of times the egg doesn't make its way into the uterus. It begins implantation in the fallopian tube. This is deadly for the female, or can be deadly for the female. The fallopian tubes, guys, are not in fact the uterus. So they have not been putting up decorations in preparation for this visitor. No, the fallopian tubes are very delicate, simple little tubes. That's all they frickin' are. So when the egg implants in the fallopian tube, it's called an ectopic pregnancy. We almost always have to induce an abortion, and you got to try again, ladies. If the fallopian tube ruptures, you bleed internally, you need major surgery. It's no bueno. This kind of error happens all the time. So ectopic pregnancies can be life-threatening. We usually abort the fetus and we try again. If it's any consolation, when we catch an ectopic pregnancy, we're usually in the stage where it's still nothing more than a handful of cells. It does not have any recognizable features or organs. These cells are relatively undifferentiated from each other. So we don't have bone cells, liver cells, kidney cells just yet. I mean, you're really talking about a microscopic ball of goo at this point, but it's goo that is growing and developing in the wrong place, and it will lead to damage if we don't do something about it. Now, when things go according to plan, we make our way all the way into the uterus. We implant somewhere in the uterine wall, and conception has begun. Right? Conception is the initial joining of the sperm and the egg. The next phase of importance is implantation. We have implanted in the uterine wall. So if we zoom in just a little bit, so we see first we have this fusion of the sperm and the egg, then we have the zygote. We are now looking at one single cell. We are now a baby that is one individual cell. The cell then cleaves itself in half. We are now two cells. Those two divide into four into 8. This is the phase known as cleavage, where we cleave the cell in two. We keep developing and keep splitting until we're this tight ball of cells. And don't ask me why, it is embryological geometry. But this cluster of cells will then shape itself into a hollow ball, right? A hollow sphere made up of a ball of cells. That is known as a blastocyst. And the blastocyst is what does the actual implantation. This hollow sphere of cells implants in the uterine wall, and by golly, you are with child. The total period of gestation takes between 37 and 40 weeks. We usually round up to 40, which is a nice round 9 months. We divide pregnancy into 3 sections, 3 months each, first, second, and third trimesters. The first trimester, as we said, is the most dangerous period of fetal life. If you are going to miscarry your baby, you are far more likely to miscarry it in the first trimester than any other time. And there are a lot of reasons for this. Most of the time, miscarriages are caused either by a failure in the implantation process. So the egg did not implant itself. And I'm very sorry, but the egg cannot survive if it's not implanted in a uterine wall. So if we don't implant, it gets flushed and we try again. If it does implant and the fetus begins to develop, but something goes wrong with the DNA transcription process, right? If there's a genetic error, most of the time what the body will do is just shut the pregnancy down, we flush the baby, we get to try again. What I mean by chromosomal error is you're usually talking about a significant error in the copying or the execution of the instructions from the DNA. What can happen is entire chromosomes can be deleted. You could miss the marker that divides one chromosome from the other, so two chromosomes become merged together. And if you want a good analogy to understand what this means, if the DNA is a book, then chromosomes are the chapters. And when we talk about a gene for something, we're talking about a one-sentence instruction for how to make a protein or do something like that. So when we talk about chromosomal errors, you're talking about mistakes where the chapter divider doesn't get registered. So now you've got two chapters of information, two chapters of instructions that merge together. And for fetal development, this is catastrophic. I mean, you're not going to create a viable organism here. Chromosomes could become deleted. So one entire chapter just gets removed. So chapter 3 and 5 get merged together. Chapter 4 was eliminated. These kinds of errors of chromosomal deletion, again, whatever results from this process is not going to be a viable organism. So many times the body will just abort the fetus naturally. Many times we can spot birth defects, which again will result in a viable fetus, but it will result in such a low quality of life for the person, or the carrying to term will bring harmful consequences to the mother, that sometimes abortion is unfortunately the better option to save the life of the mother, or because of an utter lack of quality of life that would have been afforded to the baby. There are kids that are born, guys, the baby is born like without a brain, or the brain is severely underdeveloped, so that the body will basically do little more than just keep its heart beating. But the kid won't be able to react to stimuli or talk or have friends or anything. It will just lay there breathing. So now as we enter into the second trimester, guys, we get to take a sigh of relief. If you make it into your second trimester, more than likely organ development is becoming complete, on schedule. Things seem to be going in the right direction. This is also the trimester where we can do an ultrasound and find out if it's a boy or girl. That's so exciting. Please do not use explosives in your gender reveal parties. The Midwest will thank you. Just put food coloring in a freaking cake, guys. We don't need pyrotechnics to say whether you're having a boy or girl. Seriously. The baby will become more and more human-like. It will resemble a human more and more as the second trimester goes on. And as we enter the third trimester, most development is pretty much complete, right? Organs are all developed and in place. The baby's starting to gain some weight. The final development, the finishing touches are being put on the lungs and the nervous system. The lungs are one of the last things to develop because they're one of the last things that you actually need in utero, right? You're not breathing oxygen, so those guys can wait. Let's get the brain online. Let's get the heart online. And once everything is done, then childbirth will begin. It's a magical time. So we're going to pretty much push past I'm pretty sure okay, yeah, we're not there yet. So a separate structure that is being formed along with the baby is the placenta. And the placenta is this really interesting jellyfish looking structure. It's kind of a purpley color that is also attached to the inner wall of the uterus. And this is what is really forming the main blood interface between mother and child. It's a separate kind of flat disc-like structure. This is the structure that the umbilical cord from the baby is plugging into. It is also executing an endocrine function. It is producing hormones that will have an effect, things like estrogens, progesterone, prolactin to trigger the production of milk, relaxin to help relax the joints. And the placenta is the site of the gas exchange for nutrients and waste products. So this is the interface. When the baby is getting its nutrients and oxygen from the mother, this is where it's happening. It also adds a protective barrier for toxins and diseases. So what's interesting to note is that the blood of the mother and the blood of the baby do not intermix. The baby does not get its mother's blood. It only gets oxygen and nutrients from the mother's blood. The two blood systems do not interface with each other. Once we have received nutrients from the mother within the placenta, it is then carried along the umbilical cord to the baby. So the baby gets all of its nutrients and oxygen and its waste removal through this interface. Now we're going to look closely at how this occurs. The chief thing to remember here, guys, is the process of diffusion. Diffusion is how all this is happening. So when we zoom in here, we see the mother's arteries and veins. Now notice how her arteries balloon out and really get this long interface with the baby's blood vessels. Another thing that I want you to pay attention to, very much like our pulmonary system, if we remember our heart and lung systems, within pulmonary circulation was the only time we ever saw arteries colored blue. Remember, the blood vessels were carrying deoxygenated blood from the body. They would enter the heart on the right side, and blue arteries would carry the blood up to the lungs. It would get reoxygenated, and then this is the only time we would have red veins carrying oxygenated blood back to the heart. You guys remember that detail? Super. The baby's system is working just like that. We have the baby's veins here colored red because these veins are collecting oxygen and nutrients from the placenta and carrying them towards the baby's heart. The baby's heart is then pumping deoxygenated, waste-filled blood through an artery away from the heart out to the placenta. So when we reach the placenta, this delicate intermingling of blood vessels means that the baby's blood vessels are bringing deoxygenated blood out to the surface. So the waste products, the toxins, the CO2, that stuff will diffuse out and it will diffuse into the mother's arteries. Meanwhile, her nutrients and oxygen and the good stuff that the baby needs will diffuse out of her arteries and into the baby's veins. It diffuses through multiple membranes and a fluid layer, guys. We've got to get out of the mother's blood vessel through the intracellular medium and into a baby's blood vessel. So through a membrane there as well. The blood from mother and fetus does not mix. We diffuse materials through a medium, but the blood never intermingles. This is one of the other ways that we keep mothers from passing infections onto their babies. The blood never mixes. It is during the act of childbirth, when the baby is passing through the birth canal, that infectious diseases can be transmitted. Good stuff, guys? Good stuff? All good? Cool.
Yes, thanks.
Thanks. All right, so what changes can we expect during pregnancy? Well, you know, you're growing an entire human being from scratch, so you expect some weight gain. There's an increased metabolic rate as the female is now burning an insane amount of calories trying to not only make this baby, but she's also got to produce a lot of milk. So her metabolism becomes very increased. She begins retaining fluid, which increases her blood volume by 20 to 40%. Not only does she have to produce more blood to carry extra nutrients to the baby, but blood plasma begins to be siphoned off and loaded with proteins and sugars. It's the blood plasma that gets filtered by her mammary glands to become milk. So she needs extra blood to create milk for the infant and for extra nutrients for the fetus. She will increase her respiration rate and volume, so she takes more frequent, deeper breaths. She will begin to put, as the baby grows, we put pressure on her pelvic veins, and that extra pressure puts backflow pressure in the veins down the leg, causing varicose veins. Her nutrient requirements increase. Remember, she's got to grow a whole human being from scratch, which means we got to create all new blood. So we need a lot of iron. And we have to create a whole system of muscles and soft tissue and skin and hair. That means we need a lot of protein. And we have to grow a new skeleton. So we have to be able to absorb all of the calcium that we're eating. And in order to absorb the calcium, the baby needs folic acid in order to convert that into vitamin D. So nutrient requirements that go up, we need a lot of iron and protein and folic acid. There's breast and uterine enlargement. Breasts enlarge because they're now being full of milk. The uterus enlarges because it's growing a freaking baby in there. So naturally, it's got to stretch a little bit. Also, as the hormone relaxin is produced, all of her joints become a little bit looser. So with labor and delivery, this is another example of a positive feedback loop within the hormonal system. Labor begins by hormonal changes triggered by the fetus and the mother, and the baby, which has by this point should have already turned upside down, so the head is pointing down towards the feet. The baby drops onto the cervix. The pressure on the cervix releases oxytocin, which causes smooth muscle contraction, so the baby pushes harder down. That pressure creates the release of oxytocin, which triggers smooth muscle contraction, which pushes the baby down even harder. This positive feedback loop keeps getting worse and worse. The contractions come closer and closer together until they're just a few seconds apart. And the cervix itself begins to dilate and open up. The uterus contracts strongly, mama pushes, baby is expelled from the body. And it's a beautiful moment. Childbirth is a miraculous thing, and we get to see the baby for the first time, and you get to hold it, and it's gorgeous, and it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in your life. But we're not done yet, because then you have to deliver the placenta. The placenta has to detach from the uterine wall. Remember, it's still attached to the umbilical cord, so you're still sitting there with the umbilical cord hanging out of you. So we got to pull the umbilical cord, detaching the placenta, and all of that has to be expelled as well. And now we're finally freaking done. So the major steps of childbirth, we have dilation, we have expulsion, and then we have the placental portion. So during pregnancy, estrogen and progesterone have triggered the breasts to enlarge. Their mammary glands begin siphoning off blood plasma, converting it into milk, and then storing that milk for later. Once the baby is born, it's later. The hypothalamus will stimulate the release of the hormone prolactin from the anterior pituitary gland. Prolactin will stimulate milk production. Oxytocin stimulates milk release. So it is when mama and baby are skin to skin and you're looking into each other's eyes and you love this baby so much, as your brain is releasing the love hormone, that triggers the release of milk. And it's, you know, really, if you were a drug dealer, this is how you want to hook your clients and get them addicted to your drug. But the brain basically neurochemically tricks you into becoming addicted to your child. The oxytocin creates the emotional bonding during labor and during breastfeeding. So you're being taken over by these chemicals, which chemically force a bond between mother and child. And we reinforce the bond every time the baby has to feed. And moms, how often do babies have to feed? Like every 15
All the
minutes, it feels
time.
like. Yeah, like seriously, now I don't know the first thing about brand new born babies, but I know like once they get a little bit older, they're eating like every 2 or 3 hours, which seems exhausting to me. But I'm sure newborns need to eat a lot more than every few hours. But it's oxytocin, man. It's oxytocin. You're being hormonally usurped and manipulated to fall in love with this thing so that you come running to breastfeed it every time it cries.
And then they grow teeth.
And then they grow teeth, which makes you wonder why, we didn't get like scales around our nipples to protect us from that or something like that. But,
So I have a quick question.
please,
What
absolutely.
happens with like postpartum depression then?
I have no idea. Massage therapists don't really get into the mental health side of things, but if I had to take a guess, and I really want to emphasize that word, guess, I would say maybe there are hormonal or chemical things going on in the mom's brain where she's either not as receptive to oxytocin, so she's not getting that emotional bond with the baby, or it could just be like going through the stages of grief where you had a life where you could do whatever you wanted to, and now your life revolves around keeping this baby, this little human being alive. I mean, brand new babies take up all your time and attention. I mean, all of it. So there may be also kind of a mourning going on where you're grieving the loss of this life that you built for yourself, and yeah, it's temporary. I'm saying the kid's going to grow up, but you try telling yourself that at 22 years old when all your friends are out partying and you can't because this kid's you got to breastfeed every 2 hours. You know what I mean? Again, I don't know why postpartum depression happens.
Galena put in
Those
the
are just my guesses.
chat that it could be hormonal withdrawal, and I agree with that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's another possibility. Your body will become accustomed to anything you put in it, whether it's drugs or hormones. So the more you get, you build a tolerance to it. And then after childbirth, you stop getting all those hormones. Withdrawal, it sounds like a plausible explanation to me, for sure. Are pregnant women allowed to swim? Worried about the fetus drowning? So the fetus, okay. When a
No,
woman
I'm
is
sorry.
pregnant,
That was just a joke. I'm sorry.
oh, well, I have answered this kind of question a lot. So, and I've also had students ask if it's safe to have sex while you're pregnant. They were afraid like their baby would get like a dent in his head or something like that. So in fact, if we scroll back, we'll notice that the vagina, the birth canal, and the uterus are separated by the cervix. And generally speaking, the cervix is closed. So it only really opens during the menstrual cycle to eject the menstrual lining, or during childbirth to eject the baby. Most of the other time, the cervix is closed. Your uterus is not just open to the outside world. So when you're pregnant, yes, you can go swimming. The baby's not going to drown. There's a mucus plug in there. And besides, on the other side of that mucus plug is full of fluid anyway. The baby's lungs are already full of amniotic fluid. Its lungs aren't breathing. It's getting all of its oxygen from its blood. So, I mean, if you think about what the fetus is living like, the fluid is in its nose and in down its throat and in its lungs. I mean, the baby's not breathing in the gaseous sense. So even if you were, underwater, or the baby's not going to drown. He's already drowning in amniotic fluid. He's getting all the oxygen that it needs. It's also safe to have sex when you're pregnant. Again, that cervix is closed, so nothing can get in there with the fetus. So yeah, no worries. The body's prepared for all these contingencies. Pregnant women can still do lots of fun stuff. You got to be a little more careful because your joints are looser and your center of gravity is all out of whack. So your balance and stuff is going to be off just because your center of mass is different now. But no, swimming, sex, yeah, whatever you want to do, have fun. As long as
I have a
long as the
question.
pregnancy is typical and normal, as long as there's no complications. Yes, please.
So what if you have a client that doesn't know if they're pregnant? Is it okay for them to get on the massage table prone?
Well, you said if the client doesn't know that they're pregnant. So here's what I'll say. If they have no reason to think that they are pregnant, then yeah, go ahead. But if they're trying to get pregnant and they don't know if they're pregnant or not, I would recommend not, because remember, the first trimester is the riskiest. So putting a woman face down and putting pressure on her lower back, or putting her down on a table warmer and you increase the temperature, there are just too many variables. My recommendation would be not to. But if she's trying to get pregnant, then more often than not, women who are trying to get pregnant aren't going to do anything that might inadvertently harm their fetus. So if they're trying to get pregnant, their best bet is a prenatal massage, but not in the first trimester. The other thing that I would like to say is, you can only be held accountable for the information that they give you. So if they fill out their intake form and they write on the intake form that they are not pregnant, and it turns out that they are, you have that form signed that says they told you they weren't pregnant. You can't be held liable for anything if they were dishonest with you. So just so that that's, you know, off of your conscience. But you do the best you can with the information that you have. If they don't know if they're pregnant, well, are you trying to get pregnant? If not, go ahead. But if they are trying to get pregnant and they're not sure if they are or not, better bet is to take a pregnancy test and wait and see, because we don't ever want to do anything that might possibly risk the fetus. Good stuff. Any other questions, you guys, while we're here? Alrighty. So, age-related changes in the reproductive system. So for females, it's somewhere around the age of 40, and it varies from person to person, but somewhere around the age of 40, the ovaries will begin to become unresponsive to gonadotropins. And again, the word gonadotropin, gonad changing or gonad affecting. These are hormones that change or affect the gonads, the ovaries. They start to become insensitive to them. So at around age 50 or so, the menstrual cycle stops, and this is known as menopause. She will no longer have a menstrual cycle. She is no longer fertile, so her childbearing years are behind her. These low estrogen levels, because remember the ovaries stopped doing their job, so the lower estrogen levels cause the reproductive organs to begin to atrophy. The ovaries will begin to wither away. Their reduction of secretions, so vaginal dryness, the hormonal changes lead to hot flashes and mood swings. And they also become susceptible to osteoporosis. The hormonal changes also reach out to the hormone hotline for your osteoclasts, and they start ripping up bone matrix and putting those minerals in the bloodstream. So our bones start to become more fragile. Now for males, they will continue producing sperm for the rest of their life. The health of the sperm is debatable as you get into older age, but there will be a steady decline of testosterone. So as a male ages, he may have issues with desire for sex or his ability to achieve an erection, but he will technically still be producing sperm for the rest of his life. But the older you get, the more decrepit your sperm are getting. So they may not be the best swimmers, you know, by the time you're 80 or 90. Another common complaint in men is that the prostate gland becomes enlarged. And again, the urethra passes right through the prostate. So as it swells up, it puts pressure on the urethra, pinches off your little garden hose. So guys, you feel like you got to pee and you stand there over the toilet and you try and you try and you just cannot pee. But you feel like you have to pee, but you stand there with just little drips and it's really frustrating.
And then when the reproductive organs atrophy, is that more likely to cause uterus cancer or cervical cancer, or is that just something else where the cells?
Not cervical cancer, but ovarian cancer. Sometimes, more often, what happens is they develop fibroid cysts. So fibroid cysts aren't cancer in that they don't spread, but they grow. So they don't go spreading to other parts of the body, but the existing fibroids can become larger. And I mean, doctors have removed fibroids out of people the size of grapefruits. I mean, they're huge, and they take up blood supply, they take up nutrients and things like that, take up space, but they don't function to do anything, so they don't contribute to the body. Usually they'll be removed. If they become a problem, they'll just do a full hysterectomy where they just remove the uterus and the ovaries and the fallopian tube. They just take all of it out. And then with no organs, you don't grow any more cysts. But when they remove all that stuff, if you're younger, like pre-menopausal, when they do a full hysterectomy, it sends you into menopause because they've taken away your ovaries. So your body, it triggers all the hormonal changes that you see with menopause. All right, last topic of the day, the effects of massage on the reproductive system. So massage can help alleviate some of the symptoms of PMS. When I was in massage school, we learned an abdominal massage technique that helps stave off your menstrual cramps and things like that for a couple of days. So like if you had an event or something, you know, it will basically kind of put your period on pause for a few days. But the caveat to that is it only lasts a few days, your period will come back, and it comes back worse than it would have been. So, I mean, more severe cramping, you know, more severe bloatedness. So you put it off for a few days, it comes back with a vengeance. But if you needed that day without a period for something like a wedding or an event or graduation or whatever, there is an abdominal massage technique that we were taught, at least at my school in Florida, that postpones menstrual symptoms for a day or two. Massage can also help with the symptoms of pregnancy and childbirth. It's very, very common nowadays to have massage therapists in the room during childbirth, helping with, you know, low back massage and hip massage and abdominal massage. And it also helps to balance the nervous and the endocrine systems. It helps just kind of get, because remember, pregnancy is nothing but a mind fuck of hormonal fluctuations. So after all of that stuff is settled, postnatal massage, like after childbirth, that stuff can just kind of help regulate the system, right? Kicking them back into parasympathetic mode just helps get the whole system back to a baseline so we can start regulating our homeostasis again. And again, the increase in circulation just helps the reproductive system, right? Recover. Extra blood flow helps the uterus recover from childbirth. The extra blood flow helps with the fresh blood coming in. We're flushing out the remnants of the hormones that are still left in the tissue. So all the relaxin that's still there. With increased circulation, we flush out the relaxin, which helps the joints to re-solidify like they're supposed to be. Massage just helps bring everything back to a state of normalcy. And that's been the female reproductive system, you guys. Good stuff. Questions? Comments? Concerns?
When the uterus lining swells up, is that what causes bloating?
Yep. Part of it, yeah, partly. And you're also, so as the lining becomes towards the end of that cycle, remember the lining was very, very thick and all those blood vessels are engorged. Your body is going to produce a little bit of extra blood. And in order to make that extra blood, we have to retain fluids because we got to make more blood plasma, right? So we'll retain water, so you feel bloated. And as we make new blood, that lining gets engorged. And then when no one shows up to the party, we rip all the decorations down, you bleed all of that extra stuff out, and now you're back to square one. So then as the process starts again, now we got to retain fluids to build more blood. And the process just, it's a circle.
Okay. Is there anything that controls the amount of blood flow? Like, you know, some months you're not as bloody, and then other times you just wake up in a pool of blood.
That is outside my scope of practice. I do not know. I know that it's, I don't want to say genetic, but some people have a heavier flow, some people have a lighter flow, some people's cramps are manageable with Tylenol, some people's cramps are freaking debilitating. But I do know that extraordinarily painful periods could be symptoms of other conditions like endometriosis or PCOS. So I would recommend if you're having issues, I would recommend going to see a gyno because there are treatments for that. Endometriosis, a lot of times the treatment is to be put on birth control, and having the birth control pill regulate your hormonal cycle takes away some of the symptoms of endometriosis. It's a very, very common one. And that's whenever someone asks me, like, why would you need birth control if you're not worried about having a kid, that endometriosis is the first one that pops to my mind, because so many people are prescribed birth control as a treatment for it. Not, I mean, yeah, you get the birth control effects, but not because you're trying to control birth. It's the hormonal regulation treats the symptoms of a condition. So it's more like a medication rather than a prophylaxis.
I know with birth control, there's certain pills that have just like progesterone in it, and also like estrogen. They just vary. Does it have any, like, if the pill is giving you the progesterone. You don't make your own, right?
That is generally the case. If you go on long enough, providing the body with some substance that it's supposed to make for itself, then the structures that make the thing will begin to atrophy because you don't need them. My understanding with hormonal birth control is that essentially what you're doing is you're taking these pills to create a daily dose of the hormone that your body should be producing, and then when you get to the section of pills that you take during your ovulation week, those pills are sugar pills. They don't do anything. Your body's hormones take over for that week. You have your menstrual cycle, and then you go back on the hormonal birth control pills. So that and I know every single freaking one, they're all different, but you've seen the ones that come in like compacts, right? You open it up and it's a wheel of pills, and most of them are like green or one color, but then you've got the week for your period and they're like white or something. Those are usually placebos. Those are meant to take you off of supplemental hormones to let your body's hormones do its thing during the week that you actually have your period. And then afterwards, you go back on the hormone regulation. Now, I know they don't all work the same way. And now they've got all kinds of new fancy, they've got rings that go in you, and they've got little matchstick ones that they implant in your arm. Those are pretty fancy. If I had to have a hormonal one, that's probably the one I would go with myself personally. But
I had the one in the arm for a long time. It's
did you
the
like it?
best one. Yeah, I liked it a lot. But I the reason I asked about the birth control is I was on the pill for about 10 years, and it by the end of it, I was showing like menopausal symptoms, like dryness and low estrogen and progesterone. All that stuff was just like nothing was working. So I had to go off the pill, and everything came back.
Yeah, it sounds like it was just you were developing a tolerance to it. And I mean, birth control pills can only be so strong. They can only give you so many hormones, or so much of a hormone. So yeah, maybe I'm not a doctor, but it seems to me like either we would take you off the pill for a while and let your body get back to doing its own thing and regulate itself, and maybe switch to another form of birth control or something else. Switch you to some other thing like a ring or the implant or something like that. I know that the IUDs are also popular, but I also know they hurt like a son of a bitch to install.
Only if you haven't had kids before, because after having kids, IUDs, super easy.
Just no big deal. That's just a piece of copper.
IUDs also though depend on your uterus, because my sister has like a tilted uterus, and she said that she didn't even get hers put in because they started, and she said it hurt so bad, just because of the way her uterus was shaped. So
it's just just the position of it. So it really is an individual decision. I mean, and different women have different side effects to those hormones. I mean, some people gain an insane amount of weight and their face erupts with acne and they have crazy mood swings and they're just like, F this, I'll just use condoms. And then others, hardly any side effects. So it really is a personal decision, and you really need to talk to a qualified doctor about the options, because I am certainly not qualified to educate anybody about details about hormonal birth control. I mean, I know the basics, but that's not qualified to prescribe. What else in the chat? Let's see. Adrenaline is also released during natural delivery. Yeah. Oh yeah. Thanks, Galena. Yeah, your body will definitely use adrenaline. Strong stimulation of pain receptors will send you into fight or flight mode, and so you'll begin releasing adrenaline and cortisol. So yeah, absolutely. But I'm also pretty sure that the adrenaline, even though it may take the edge off, it really doesn't do much to blunt the pain of childbirth. Have you guys seen the documentary, The Business of Being Born? All right, I put it in the chat. The Business of Being Born is a documentary. It's done by Ricky Lake. Yeah, that Ricky Lake, the one that had the talk show and everything. You know what I'm talking about, Ricky Lake? She did this documentary about when she got pregnant and started learning about the baby industrial complex and how childbirth works in a hospital and all this stuff. And it's eye-opening. If you don't know much about childbirth, man, it's insane. You know, the position that women are giving birth in, you know, on your back with your legs up in the stirrups, that's not because that's the ergonomic way to have a baby. That's because it's convenient for the doctor. You really should be standing up and like squatting. They go into like water births and they talk about doulas and the role of doctors in childbirth and how like pregnancy isn't a medical condition. Like you don't need a doctor to deliver a baby. Women's bodies have been delivered babies in the bushes for a lot of years before doctors. They do make the distinction that if the pregnancy is not normal or there's a problem with the baby, then absolutely doctor, hospital, all the way. But they talk about when you go to the hospital and they give you an injection of Pitocin, which triggers labor, but then you need an epidural and now you can't feel anything and now you can't push because you can't feel anything. So then they give you a C-section, and C-sections are major surgery. They are not just some like outpatient thing where they just cut you open, take the baby and send you home. Like and the recovery from a C-section is intense. And there's actually like real legit footage of Ricki Lake, her freaking self in a bathtub, like having a baby. And it's a documentary about childbirth. They really don't hold back. You want to know what childbirth is really like, I highly recommend you watch the documentary. It will make you decide whether you want to have a kid or not. I mean, you watch it, you make a decision. It will make up your mind for you. Whether this is really something that you want to do, in which case, man, babies are beautiful. Childbirth is miraculous, and it takes women way stronger than me with way more patience than me to raise kids. But if you're on the fence, man, it gives you a sober idea of what you are in for sure.
It's really good.
Yes, it is such a good one. I love documentaries, and this is one of the ones that stuck with me, and I recommend it every single time I teach the reproductive system. If you haven't seen it, man, it's worth it. Even if you've already had kids, like it's worth it. It's worth it. All right. Any other questions? Questions?
I was gonna say one last thing that I think there's maybe stigma or just seems common to just be really scared of childbirth, and especially natural childbirth. And it's definitely something to consider, that it has been done throughout history, like without doctors, and hormonally the natural way works out really well. And don't be scared.
I think it's one of those like raw human experiences where like seeing a child being born or being present when a loved one passes, and you know, these are like becoming a grandparent, like these are just these moments that everything else in life is put into perspective by these kinds of human moments. I think you put it very well. Natural childbirth is beautiful, and we shouldn't be scared of it. Women's bodies know what to do. They've been having babies for like millions of years before we had OBGYNs. You know, again, if there's a problem or anything, you need a doctor, of course, but for most healthy pregnancies, your body knows what to do. Your body is capable of performing a basic biological function. It keeps its heart beating, it keeps its bones growing, it can deliver a baby. Bodies, they're sophisticated.
It's so weird because especially in the documentary, and like with my friends and just people I know who have, you know, given birth, they all talk about their OBGYN, and I've like never even met one. I've never been recommended one. Like, I don't know if it's just like Oregon or like Portland or like this area, but it's always like, and here's your midwife. And I mean, I don't know. So I've never even like, I know it's different. Sorry, my kids are crazy right now. But I'm giving birth in like 2 months, so you guys are hyping me up. Thank you.
Yay. Yay. Yeah, man, kids are great, you know. Kids are great. Childbirth is beautiful. It's magical. It's a little miracle. I mean, when you see a little baby come out for the first time and they've got 10 fingers and 10 toes and they got little fingernails and little eyelashes, and you just want to eat their little toes. But it's the miracle of life, you know. Watch the documentary. I recommend it. And if you're thinking about having kids, interview several doulas. Get yourself a doula. For sure. All right, guys. This has been our lesson on the female reproductive system. We are at a point now where I would say either let's take a break and we can come back and just run through this one more time, make sure we got all the details. Or if you guys are good, you tell me, then we can just call it for the day. Because we've covered everything I got to cover. So
I'm good. That was great.
I'm good too. Yeah, thanks.
I'm good.
I'm good here.
all right, guys. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure. It's good to see you guys. I love seeing your faces every week. Nice. All right. You guys enjoy your weekend, and I will see you next week. Same time, same place.
Thank you.
Bye.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.